Apparently, I have very unpopular opinions about Ned Fulmer and his new attempt at rebranding with his podcast Rock Bottom, and I want to talk about them. Hi, if you don't know me, you can call me Louise. I go by the channel name Ludic Louise both here on YouTube and on TikTok. My TikTok is an experience. It is a place. I do post videos. I don't know if I want people to go to my TikTok or not. I haven't yet decided, although it is currently the platform where I have the largest audience. Although I'm trying to diversify and start doing more long form content like this here on YouTube because I chat a lot in my daily life and people are always saying to me, "You should be on YouTube. You should put this somewhere. I want to hear what you say. I miss you." And I would say they can just call me, but I notoriously don't really answer text messages or phone calls. We're working on it. We're working on it. Also, these are sunglasses. Ignore them unless you like them, then enjoy them. I'm recovering from a head injury, and if you know me personally, don't worry. It's the same one as usual. I haven't gotten any more, and knock on wood, will not be getting any more. Knock on wood, extra strong. And I tried to record this without the sunglasses, and my brain said no. So, you either get me with the sunglasses or you don't get me at all. And if I do end up doing more long form videos and I end up wearing sunglasses, I have a whole collection. So you'll get to see lots of different, varying degrees of cuteness and style to my sunglasses. But back to the topic at hand, which is in fact Ned Fulmer and the Try Guys and his podcast. And I think that I need to be very, very clear that I'm not condoning any of Ned's actions. I'm not personally a Ned Fulmer fan. I just am making this video because I think it represents a perspective that I just haven't seen anybody else talk about, even though it feels like everyone on the planet feels the need to cover this man's podcast, especially people who say, why is he even on the internet? If you don't think he's here, why are you talking about him? Like if you don't want to give the man more attention, don't give the man more attention. But alas, everybody else has had their piece to say, so I want to say mine. And this video is going to be a little bit, not all over the place, but this isn't scripted or really thought out, but hopefully should make sense. And if it doesn't, you live and you learn. Anyways, starting off, what's a Ned? You maybe clicked on this video, you don't know what a Ned is, what a Ned Fulmer is, what a Try Guys is. Try Guys started off with this company called BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed had this group called the Try Guys, and then they started getting really popular, and then the videos featuring the Try Guys started getting more views than other videos. And eventually, this group of four guys decided to purchase their own rights to the Try Guys name, to the Try Guys image, to, I believe, past videos of the Try Guys, and do everything they could to separate themselves from BuzzFeed, and they officially left BuzzFeed, this media production company. And they did a great job of leaving BuzzFeed because most of the time when creators say, well, we're going to make it on our own, they don't really make it. And the Try Guys became this truly impressive pinnacle of proving that you can be successful from an idea that starts on YouTube and create an actual profitable, highly profitable business employing many employees producing content off of just four guys trying things like, what if we rode bikes? Or what if we had pregnancy pain simulators and screamed a lot? And it created this kind of cultural revolution a little bit, and there are still so many channels today that, whether you would know it or not, if you don't do marketing, are following very similar steps to the Try Guys formula, or trying to create that same mass appeal to a very specific demographic that the Try Guys did an amazing job of catering to. Mostly people who are adults but want to feel not necessarily like they're a kid again, but they want to feel welcomed and like they belong. And a lot of the Try Guys image, and there were four of them before the incident we'll talk about very briefly. Ned, Eugene, feels wrong to start with Ned, but Ned, Eugene, Zach, and Keith. And a lot of their image was, these are guys you could just see on the street. These are guys you could be friends with. And they're redefining what it means to be a man. And that is not what they would ever say their own images, but all of their content was focused on basically expressing healthy masculinity. So it wasn't, with the exception of some projects that Eugene, who was the only gay member, worked on, about exploring, am I a man? What is my gender identity? It was about showing that you can be a guy and have close male friends and have fun and be silly. And you don't have to make fun of women, even if you're trying things that you've never done before, or if you don't know what it's like to be a woman, or if you have lots of questions. You can be respectful towards women and respectful towards diverse audiences and still be a man and be seen as a man who is desirable in the sense of friendship and in the sense of, I think they're kind of the epitome of, yeah, my friend would date that guy. Like, yeah, you should date him. He's a good guy. because they kind of are like the Try Guys. They try things. They're fun. They're quirky. They're relatable. And Ned's role in all of that was that he was the wife guy. And that ended, as did his time with the company, when he decided to cheat on his wife with someone who was working under him. He was a producer and a co-founder, and this other producer was working underneath him, and they started having an affair. Very, very messy and really awful because Ned's wife found out about this affair not from Ned, but from his fans. Because fans were seeing these two out and about, touching each other in ways you wouldn't do if you had a wife and weren't engaging in an affair. And I just cannot imagine the pain of, marrying a man and then finding out that he's cheating on you through DMs from fans and through the internet. Like, genuine stab to the heart. I don't think that's actually my heart, but moment. Like, I just awful beyond words. And after that, he left the company. And now, what we're here to talk about today is he's made his resurgence with a podcast called Rock Bottom. And the first person that he interviews is the wife whose life he destroyed, named Ariel. And before we talk more about some of the things that came up in the podcast, and this is not all going to be a full dissection of the podcast, these are just some of my general thoughts about the situation and areas where I think my opinions differ significantly from other people's, because I honestly hate it when creators all talk about the same thing at once and they say the same exact thing over and over and over and over again. You feel like you have to watch all the videos because you need to know everybody's opinions, but the opinions, they're all the same. So these will just be areas where I differ. But one of the things about Ned and his status as a wife guy in the Try Guys that I often see mentioned is this idea that Ned was the wife guy because there was nothing else interesting about him. And that was all he could do, was be the guy who talked a lot about his wife. And if you don't know what a wife guy is, it's a man who's really into his wife. And Ned's whole thing was, I have a wife. I love my wife. So happy with my wife. My wife and I have kids now. Like, that was his shtick. My wife. My wife. Like, I think at one point there even was like a toy you could press and it would say, like, my wife. And if you just look up Ned Fulmer, like, clips that age badly or wife compilation or discussions about what it means to be a wife guy, there are a lot of discourse about it done by other creators, and I would link them, but head injury, and also I have a lot going on in my personal life right now, which, if there are a lot of comments in this video, I'm not going to interact or respond to them, most likely because I have other stuff going on, but you guys are always welcome to have discourse amongst yourselves as long as you keep it respectful, is all that I ask. But when it comes to Ned being a wife guy, I disagree vehemently that the only thing interesting about Ned was his wife. I think there are a lot of interesting things about Ned Fulmer, but I think that all the things that are interesting about him are not aligned with who the Try Guys' core audience is, and that Ned was smart enough to know that. And for instance, I don't know a ton about Ned's background, although I did just look up a little bit more very quickly, but I did know that he went to Yale and got a degree in chemistry. And there are a lot of people who love hearing stories about what schools like Yale are like or what you did back in college. But the Try Guys audience is not that audience. The Try Guys audience is very centered in anti-elitism and feeling realistic. And the idea of Yale, white man who went to Yale, not a great look for them, because they already were running up against we got 3 white men and 1 Asian guy, but thank goodness he's gay. And then they were trying to expand and actually did successfully end up adding more people to their cast, and I think did a good job overall of diversifying. I'm personally a big fan of Johnny Cakes myself, and also Kwesi, but everyone's a fan of Kwesi. Sorry if I'm not trying to alienate people who don't watch BuzzFeed, or who didn't watch BuzzFeed originally, or who don't watch the current iteration of the Try Guys. The Try Guys are no longer directly affiliated with BuzzFeed. But Ned. Ned would never be able to say, these are my stories from college that I think are funny on the Try Guys platform. Ned also apparently did improv comedy. I didn't know that. And sketch comedy for a while in Chicago. I didn't know that. The Try Guys didn't really do sketches, and I don't know what Ned's genre of comedy is, and I don't want to make too many assumptions on what, a white guy who went to Yale style comedy would be. As someone who I did comedy at a school that, I don't know, it's always 50-50 whether or not people have heard of it, called Middlebury, and sometimes white guys doing comedy would be really good and really funny, and sometimes white guys doing comedy would be very, you are a wealthy white man doing comedy. Maybe try something different, add something new to the mix, or, I see why comedy desperately lacks diversity because there are just so many jokes you can make and there are things you maybe just shouldn't talk about. But I don't know. I don't know what Ned's comedy looks like, but I think the fact that none of us, as far as I know, knew that he did improv comedy is kind of weird. Like, and maybe it came up at some point. If you're a real fan, you'll know. But I think that he did have a lot of things that were interesting about him that just didn't mesh at all with what the Try Guys brand was, which wasn't, quirky comedy or sketch comedy or improv. It was, we're guys and we try things and also we're friends. Haha. And I think he was just smart enough to not make himself disliked and to not, for the most part, take risks that might damage the brand, a brand that he created. And that's the only thing that I think Ned really has going for him, is that he has an impressive resume in terms of being a part of the Try Guys. He started at BuzzFeed as an intern and then became in charge of one of their whole like intern type programs and then started developing the Try Guys and then became co-founder of that. And it is just truly an inspiring, amazing story. And for those of you who don't know marketing or don't, I do some freelance graphic design and marketing work specifically. Actually, you know what? We don't need to get into my resume on here. But for those of you who are outside of that space, it's hard to imagine what a true success story the Try Guys is. But the Try Guys and their ability to take this property that belonged to BuzzFeed and at the same time as BuzzFeed's views and content was going like this, the Try Guys were able to go like this, gather their whole entire new audience, retain their original fans, and add on to it and create an actual company with actual employees under a relatively short period of time is astonishing. It's very, very impressive. And also the way that they managed to stay so close to their original brand of we're guys and we try things and we have fun. Ha 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 hoo. Is just like there aren't even necessarily words for what a big deal it was at the time, and also the precedent it set for people truly being able to branch off and have their own YouTube channels that became companies. And to say, look, this works. The Try Guys did it. These other people did it. This is something that in this modern era is something that was never previously possible because you didn't even have YouTube in the past. And that also is something that Ned has going for him, is that he was a large part of that success. And I'm not at all saying that he did more than any of the other Try Guys or even commenting on that, but I think that that is also something the man is going for him. He is interesting in that he was able to create this massive media empire with his friends, and then he also destroyed it all. And that's what it comes to today. But I think the idea that Ned is too boring, and we should have started with this, but Ned's too boring to start a podcast, I don't think that's true. Like, I think the man has a lot of things that could be interesting to say, or things that if he talked to somebody else could go really well, that he just could never do on a platform like the Try Guys that was kind of the antithesis of all of the things that make him cool, if that makes sense, or makes him cool to a certain select group of people who there definitely is an audience for when it comes to podcasts. So for the question of do I think Ned should have a podcast or do I think it's going to succeed, I think it depends on how you're defining success. I think it is very realistic for Ned to be able to get a podcast that has a base number of steady listeners and gets some amount of maybe questionable but real money brand deals. I think that is very realistic. And I also think that he's filling a niche. And this is something I also haven't really seen other people talk about, is that, in my opinion, there's a big niche right now, given just how strong, I hate using the word cancel culture, but maybe we'll just say how unforgiving Gen Z is of public figures, specific public figures' mistakes. Because some public figures can do, like, everything wrong. Like, Nicki Minaj, don't look into Nicki Minaj. Just don't do it. Just in general. Like, stay liking her music. Don't, like, look into the things she supported or done or the people or her relatives. But some people can do all these things all the time and it's totally fine. That's Nicki Minaj. And other people, they say one or two things that they maybe shouldn't have said or have a bad day, and all of a sudden you should never listen to their music or never listen to anything that they've ever been affiliated with again. And I want to be very clear that I'm not talking about people who have been outed as racists. I'm not talking about those people. And I also think that's an important thing to mention, is I think that this niche is a niche where people who have been canceled but wouldn't consider themselves having been canceled, or who have made bad choices in life and have hit rock bottom, often lack a podcast or a platform to go on where the person they're talking to understands where they're coming from and also does not have any racist allegations against them. Because most of the time, when people are dealing with controversy, they want to go and sit down with somebody and talk to them and tell them their story, who has dealt with controversy but has dealt with a societally palatable, at least to an older audience, controversy. And Ned's whole thing being, yeah, I cheated on my wife with somebody who was working under me, but she wasn't super duper young. There wasn't that, like, giant problematic age gap as a factor in the same way that you often see with affairs and cheating scandals. I think it makes him someone where people are going to reach out to him and that there might be some interesting episodes from that. So I think that his podcast most likely will have a moderate amount of success. Do I think it'll be anything compared to what it would have been if he hadn't ruined his life? No. Of course not. Of course not. But I also think that if he had been trying to establish a podcast or something like this, at the same time as having his typical BuzzFeed era audience or his post BuzzFeed Try Guys audience, I don't think they would have listened because he was never the most interesting one of that group. So I think from a marketing standpoint, right now his entry into the podcast, depending on what he's going for. But I think his future is still feasible when it comes to that podcast and that channel. But the other thing I want to touch on is the idea that he should get a real job. And this is the thing that always kind of makes me laugh a little, is when people go after influencers for doing cringy things, or former content creators, and say, well, get a real job. And this is kind of with, like, there's this man named Jason Nash who I have qualms with, and just, he was a part of so much problematic comedy when he was, like, the only adult in the room for so many things that I watched growing up. But he spent a lot of time on TikTok Live, and on TikTok Live, people will basically pay you money through the form of gifts, which shows like a little rose on your screen or like a little floating thing. And he gets mocked for that a lot. And people are like, well, just go get a real job. Not realizing that he's probably making a lot of money from those TikTok Lives, and that he couldn't just get a real job that let him keep his same lifestyle. And I feel very similarly about Ned Fulmer. And I'm very clear that I don't know what their parents' financial situation is, and also that people's parental financial situations often don't reflect their realities, especially when, you've done things like cheated on your wife and lost your company. Like, that, for a lot of parents, including very wealthy parents, is kind of a, you made your bed, now go lie type of situation. But I think a lot of people don't understand, especially kids or teens, just how hard it is to get back into the job market if you haven't been working for a while, or if you have no traditional experience. My family life is problematic, to say the least, and it's something I don't plan on talking about on this channel, but my mom ended up being a stay-at-home mom for a while, and when she wanted to get back into the workforce, she had a really hard time doing it, even though she had a degree from a good college, and she is a very hardworking person who's very talented. All the jobs that she was looking at wanted either a set amount of experience in that field, and they wanted the experience to be recent, meaning even though 10 years ago she'd worked this job, jobs wouldn't hire her because they say, oh, that experience is too old, even in areas where the fields hadn't changed or were very similar. And I think that, it's very different to be a stay-at-home mom applying for a job versus a reputation-ruined content creator applying for a job. But in my mom's case, she was dealing with factors like, oh, you're an older woman. And, you don't call it age discrimination, you just reject the person's application or interview them and don't hire them and get away with it. Whereas if somebody is a reputation-ruined content creator, that also makes it hard to get a job, even if they aren't an older woman who hasn't been in the workforce for a while. And so I think the idea that Ned could just go and get a job is kind of maybe not the most accurate. And I've also seen a lot of people point to, well, he, has a degree from Yale in chemistry. He, as far as I can tell, never really worked any chemistry-related jobs, meaning it would be very difficult for him to get a job that paid a salary. He's 38 for a 38-year-old man in a chemistry-related role with just a bachelor's degree and no other work experience. That would be very, very difficult. And especially with chemistry, you don't want to ever hire somebody who's underqualified or doesn't know what they're doing if they're actually in charge of advising on matters where you really need to know chemistry. It also doesn't seem like that's something he's interested in doing or qualified to do. And having just a degree from Yale doesn't necessarily mean you can just get any job, especially when you are 38. He's not in his 20s. He's not, 27 and done with fooling around and ready to finally get out there. He's 38, a man with 2 kids who is going to want a salary to be able to support himself and then, most likely also help support the kids. And I think that that is something that just isn't, will it come from this podcast? Also probably not. But I don't think it's likely to come from him just handing out resumes saying, hi, I'm Ned Fulmer, the canceled Try Guy. Can I come work for your company with my chemistry degree? And so I think that it's very silly to see all these people criticizing him returning to the internet and saying, well, go and get a real job. And I also think it's a little bit hypocritical because when people, such as actors, for example, including actors who've never been in any sort of controversy, do decide to get a real job, they deal with a lot of flack for it. Even jobs that we respect. I think everybody can sort of think of a celebrity. They can't really remember the name of who they read an article about how now they work at Trader Joe's. And they're like, oh, so sad, childhood celebrity. You were an actor when you were a kid and now you work at Trader Joe's. Oh my gosh. And that is kind of like oh, that's sad that they weren't able to continue acting and now they are in a grocery store. But even jobs like being a nurse, for example, Jennifer Stone, who played Harper in Wizards of Waverly Place, is, I believe, a nurse. I say that believe because I don't know if she has like a more specific title or other credentials, but that's a really admirable job for a lot of people. And there still are so many people being like, oh, well, that's so sad that she got a real job, or oh, why would she leave acting? And it's like the way that we criticize people, even people we like, we take that same criticism and magnify it to 1,000 when it comes to people we don't like Ned. Can you imagine trying to work even at a grocery store as Ned Fulmer, the guy who cheated on his wife from the Try Guys? That's not going to go very well. That's just not going to go very well. And I also think that I want to address that there are areas where he does have experience. For example, as a producer, as someone who was a part of creating this really impressive brand of the Try Guys. And in theory, I know at one point he updated his LinkedIn to say that he had his own media company. I don't know what that looks like currently, if that's still a project that he's working on. But when it comes to being hired by somebody else, when it comes to areas like marketing, it's a liability if your reputation is really bad. And his reputation right now is not great. And any company, whether they're, taking on multi-million-dollar projects or a smaller company that has the ability to pay him the type of salary he would typically be looking for, they are not going to want to take on somebody whose name is associated with cheating with a subordinate, nearly ruining the brand that they created and getting kicked out of their own company for breaking the rules. That is just not a good look for any company that deals with marketing or advertising, whether it's external or internal, because as soon as that gets out, everybody knows you're the company that decided to hire Ned Fulmer, and that's a risk, And I also just, I think people don't think about all those things when they go, oh, well, he should just go get a real job. I also want to address that a lot of times for people like content creators, they have a certain lifestyle that they're used to living at. And I want to be very clear that I'm not saying, you should be able to stay rich forever. But especially when you're someone who has kids, it can be a question of, can my kids stay in their same school district? And I know that his kids are relatively young, so I'm not sure if that is an issue or not. Or can we still stay in our house and afford our mortgage? Or do we have to move? And do we have to move far away from family members or friends, or to an area that could be dangerous, especially if you're living in an area that is a high cost of living because you thought you'd always be able to afford to live there, and now your financial circumstances have changed. And that's something that, many families deal with all the time. And I'm not in any way trying to say that influencers have it worse. I think that a lot of people don't realize that when an influencer or a content creator loses their job, all of a sudden they're not their job, they're just a person who doesn't have money and doesn't necessarily have steady ways of making that money or making anywhere near as much money as they were used to making, and also have additional barriers to being able to get traditional employment, such as, harassment, perception of reputation, and just the knowledge that people are going to find you. And that's really scary. Like, think about it right now. If you, don't think about if you decided to cheat on your wife, but if you knew going to your job tomorrow that half the people there were going to know about one of the worst moments of your life, or if we're going with Ned didn't really care, the worst moment of your ex-wife's life, and feel some sort of way about you towards it. And I feel like that would make it so you maybe couldn't work a lot of jobs or contemplate them. But I also want to mention that because I'm not at all saying that Ned isn't selfish, but I think that there are a lot more factors that likely go into something like trying to start a podcast or trying to slowly reemerge on the internet. Because if Ned is able to successfully say, hey, I'm back now, my wife kind of hates me still, but that's okay, I'm aware of it, then he also can show back up in other places without it being this giant, I feel like everybody's had binoculars, Ariel and Ned spotting event for the past 3 years. And that's a really, really, really long time. 3 years ago, I was 20. I just turned 20. And actually, my life's such a mess. I don't even want to relive what was going on 3 years ago. But 3 years ago was just a very long time. A kid who can talk. There are children who were born then who now are, speaking full sentences. And that's kind of scary. So, I mentioned that. In terms of the actual podcast, and this is the part that I'm putting at the end because I think it's the most controversial and the most likely to elicit reactions of people who aren't actually listening to the things that I am saying. And I'm going to take a quick little sip of, this is actually just water. My water. I don't think that it's weird that he didn't apologize more. one of the biggest things I've heard on the internet right now is, why didn't he say he was sorry? Why did he make it all about him? It's his podcast. He says, this is Rock Bottom with Ned Fulmer. My guest is Ariel. Like, this is his podcast. And obviously, when you're on a podcast, you should make it about your guest, but it also was about her. It wasn't just about him. He just happened to be the cataclysmic event that ruined a large part of both of their lives and really messed her up. And I also think that there's a very high likelihood that behind the scenes he has tried to apologize to her and has said how sorry he is over and over and over again in many different ways. I think that if he hadn't, they likely, like, they seem to be getting along. I don't think that would happen unless he had tried to express, even if he did it badly, just how sorry he was for hurting her so poorly. And hurting her so badly, even if he did it poorly. And I think it'd be very weird after 3 years, like 3 entire years, to get on the internet and sob to a woman who is your ex-wife. Like, can you imagine, like, I'm so sorry, Ariel. I know that I ruined our lives, and how will you ever forgive me? I know that you won't. Like, that would also come across as being very, very selfish, and I would argue even more manipulative than he was already getting accused of being. Instead of, oh, he's aloof, oh, he thinks it's not a big deal, oh, he's not taking accountability, it would be, man tries to manipulate ex-wife, man tries to get pity from ex-wife, man sobs to try to, like, sympathy farm for his podcast about how sad things are and how much he hurt his poor wife. So I think it was pretty normal that it was just a conversation about what happened, and he did say I'm sorry, but he didn't really dwell on it. And I think he, could have thrown in a little bit more of his role in the situation. But I also think everybody knows that he's a part of the situation. And I think Gen Z in particular's fascination, and also this applies to some millennials, but with forcing people to take accountability for situations where the accountability is already clearly taken or does not need to be taken in front of the public, is so weird. So very weird. And this is a bit of an aside, but it's something I want to talk about. And yeah, I'm going to talk about it. Totally not related to Ned Fulmer. But I recently saw a video of a girl who posted that she had been rescinded from her nursing school shortly after starting because she broke their social media policy by trying to film like a day in the life type video or something similar to that. And she posted this to say, like, this is a warning to everybody else. I did this. I shouldn't have done this. I really regret it. But at no point was she saying, oh, I hate everyone who enforces these policies, or policies are dumb, or I didn't deserve to get kicked out. She's just saying, I got kicked out, this is what happened, so you can learn from my story. And other people started, like, talking about her video saying, oh, this girl just doesn't understand how the world works. She, needs to take accountability for her actions. Oh, I'm so sorry this happened to you, but, social media and phones never belong in a healthcare setting. And also accusing her of breaking HIPAA, something that it does not seem like she did. It seems like she broke a specific contractual obligation with her college or her nursing program, and that's why she was rescinded shortly after starting. But it is so weird to see someone getting on the internet and saying, hi, I made a mistake, let's talk about the mistake I made because I regret making the mistake and I don't want you to make it too. And then see all the reactions videos being, she just needs to take accountability for what she did. Like, what, do you want her to sob and grovel on her knees for you, random stranger, about the school that already rescinded her and isn't going to let her back in because she seems extra sad to you that day? And I think that is what people want. Like, they genuinely want influencers, people doing things wrong, to, like, say, I'm so sorry, like, my life is over, will you ever forgive me? And to put the power of forgiveness in the hands of strangers. And I also think that's very, in some ways, counterintuitive to one of the major comments when people go through controversies is, get therapy, get help. And if you've gotten therapy and gotten help, you are not going to be putting the rest of your life or the emotional response to something you have done wrong in the hands of strangers who are not connected to the situation. People who are mentally healthy don't go to random strangers and say, will my wife ever forgive me? They are aware that their wife is not going to forgive them. They are actively working on bettering themselves so they can be a better partner for the next person they are with, and they are moving on with life and hoping to help those around them also move on. And that is something that he mentions in the podcast, is that Ariel felt it was necessary to discuss the story in order to be able to move on. And I don't know, not how much truth there is to that. I would believe it. He said it. She didn't disagree. I think that a lot of people, for some reason, decide to take away Ariel's agency when talking about her. And I think that that is a decision that is sometimes appropriate when we're talking about shocking allegations of cheating. in the immediate aftermath to assume, okay, she's probably not thinking with her head straight. She's been with this man for this long. They have 2 kids together. Hopefully she'll come to her senses. But I think 3 years after the fact, it's demeaning and kind of misogynistic to assume that Ariel would have been forced to participate in this project if she did not want to, or she was not okay with it. And I think that that is something that we should maybe stop doing. Like, if a woman says, I want to participate in this project, say, okay, she's participating in that project. We don't like the project, but instead of saying, oh, well, he forced her or he made her. And also, I've seen this mentioned that the channel that this podcast is on is actually a channel that was formerly either hers or both of theirs, and that's why it already has so many subscribers. And I've seen people be able to look up, like, the at least comments of people saying they looked up the history of the channel to confirm that's true. I haven't independently verified those comments myself, but if that is the case, she likely agreed to that. Ariel seems like a very intelligent, capable woman, and I do not believe that she would just let her ex-husband steal a channel from out under her for their podcast without knowing about that in advance and talking about it. And I also think Ariel is someone who's very intelligent, and one of the things that is a factor amongst all of my friends who are very smart in the way that Ariel presents herself when they have husbands who are very involved in business ideas or also very intelligent, they talk about things. Like, they talk about business strategy, they talk about marketing. And Ariel herself has a background as an interior designer. And so, I would assume some of those skills are similar, but not everything. But she likely knows a good deal about marketing and about public perception, or now she certainly does. So I don't think that she would allow him to do something like that and be blindsided by it, because she's been blindsided enough in her life at this point. But yeah, I just also want to mention that as a factor. But as for Ned and Ariel, I don't think it was that weird that he didn't cry or beg her for forgiveness, because it's 3 years ago. They've already gotten past that phase in their lives, and for us as an audience to ask them to recreate it to, I guess, satisfy our desires to see Ned suffer is kind of parasocial in an inappropriate way, in my opinion. And once again, I'm aware this is likely an unpopular opinion. I also didn't see any of her comments coming off as mean as other people are. At one point, he says, I'm going to start my own podcast, and she says, do you think you're interesting enough? And everyone's like, oh, that dig. She roasted him over an open flame. And I don't think she was saying that. I think she was genuinely just saying, well, do you think you're interesting enough to have this go well? And also reflecting the fact that Ned's whole thing has never been being particularly interesting. And I don't think it was meant to be like the world's nicest comment, but I don't think it was her, oh, I'm shaming him, oh, I'm coming for his jugular, because at the end of the day, he is not only her ex-husband, who they had a very public falling out, even though we didn't see them separate and didn't have confirmation of that definitively until now, but he also is the father of her children. And most moms, when they are in a situation where their partner cheated on them, and that is the extent of the wrongdoing, even if it was horrific, they are not going to repeatedly try to humiliate or belittle their ex-spouse and the father of their kids. That's just not usually what happens, especially on a public stage. And I don't think that the reception is necessarily bad. I think it is good for people to very firmly be able to cut the ties between the two of them, and I think it'll open up a lot more ability for her to pursue projects on her own without being constantly asked about Ned, which seems like is one of the goals of that episode of the podcast, is to confirm that they have split. They are donezo, although they are still co-parenting together. But yeah, I didn't see her, really roasting him the way that I've seen a lot of other commentators talk about it. Was she lovey-dovey? No. She was very upset, very hurt, very raw, very vulnerable. And was he the world's best husband? No, he's never been. Like, he's never been. I also think that is also something that's very weird. It's like people expecting, I guess, to see a person that is different than the way Ned has always presented himself now that he's done something awful. And I also, yeah, I don't think it was the world's best, most interesting podcast. I don't think that I'll listen to more episodes of Rock Bottom because I'm not the target audience for that podcast. But I think that, and I hate to say this, something like it had to be done for Ned to re-enter the internet. And it was never going to be received well. And I think of all the things that he could have done, given his reputation, sitting down and having a conversation with his wife and I hate to say this, from a personal perspective, ugh. Like, why would you do that? Go away, stay away. Ugh, you weirdo cheater. Nobody wants to deal with you anymore. You screwed up your life. Go deal with it. But from a marketing perspective, I think it, in some ways, had to be done in order for him to maintain or regain a level of visibility or a level of acceptance. And I also think that when we think about other creators, for example, Cody Ko, who was involved in a controversy, who made some decisions that came to light and people went, no, not Cody Ko, myself included, unfortunately, because I really like watching his content, have been able to, he just stayed silent and he doesn't, at least last time I checked, get the same metrics as before, but still has a core audience, still has some ability to do brand deals or to get money from YouTube simply by virtue of not saying a word, as far as I'm aware. If there is a Cody Ko apology or something like that, do let me know. I'd be interested in that. But I think that when you look at more serious allegations and the ways that those people have been able to weather storms successfully, I don't think it's surprising that Ned Fulmer, at age 38, as someone with a history of being behind one of the most successful brands to come out of modern media, modern non-televised media, is going to try a podcast and giving it a shot, and is going to try seeing if he does still have a place on the internet or trying to carve one out. And I think that he knows a lot of people who do marketing and has done professional producing and brand work himself. And a lot of the things check out in that sense as to how the podcast is set up and how it's running. And I would not be surprised if it also ends up being a way for people to be introduced to him, who will then hire him for freelance projects, and people who don't really care about anyone knowing the name Ned Fulmer, or people where their clientele are never going to know what the name Ned Fulmer means. Or they'll know that it's a guy who cheated on his wife and then for some reason did a podcast about it, I guess. But yeah, those are my thoughts, I believe. Hopefully that's everything. I'm gonna be so mad if I left something out about Ned Fulmer and his podcast and my rather unpopular opinions. If you enjoyed listening, feel free to subscribe and I'll post about things. Not sure what exactly yet, but if you enjoy listening to me talk, you'll probably enjoy the things I have to talk about. And that'll be it. Let me know. What do you think of his podcast? And also, what do you think of the idea of influencers should get a normal job? Do you think it is realistic? Have you seen any influencers or content creators, especially ones who are in their 30s, who were able to just get a normal job after stopping content creation, and a normal job that was a seller that was able to sustain kids? That's the other thing is, I'm not talking like, oh, you got a job. I'm talking like a job that you would get or expect to be able to get, even if it was on the lower end of what a man who's 38 who got a degree from Yale should be getting, or one would think would be getting. But anyways, let me know, and I hope that you have a lovely rest of your afternoon, evening, or whatever time it is for you.